we have a permit already in place for the water and sanitary.
48 all the way up to Foley Road. Wrong direction. So the project schedule for improvements in 2023, that's where it's slated right now. If you recall, we did hold 2 public informational meetings on this project with several different options that were discussed for the trail and roadway. Kind of narrowed that down to 2 options, and then we kind of settled on an option to go forward with. But just to review, this is the existing condition here. Current roadway is 14-foot drive lane heading south with an 8-foot parking lane, and then a 12.5-foot driving lane northbound. And then the trail abuts right up against the curb and gutter on the east side, and that's where we have all those issues with ADA. That's why we're looking at redoing the trail as well with this project. So for the proposed improvements, I'll go ahead and just talk on this slide. The selected option to move forward with the feasibility study is what's shown on the screen here. Basically, it's the minimal roadway width with a parking lane that's really allowable on that roadway. So 2 11-foot drive lanes, 8-foot parking lane on the west-hand side. That does include the 2-foot gutter in the curb and gutter as well. And then a 5-foot boulevard space and a 10-foot wide trail. And this basically fits in the footprint that's out there today. So don't need any more right away. We can construct it where it is right now. Does require some storm sewer modifications, but still retains that parking lane that most of the residents wanted during those meetings. So. Project costs are about $2.4 million. It has gone up a little bit. We've awarded a few projects this year, so we updated all the costs based on those numbers. Costs did go up. As far as assessments go on this property, 100% of the project is assessed up to 26 feet in width, and that's in accordance with the city's assessment policy. And then all those other additional costs, any width over 26 feet. This is a municipal stated roadway, so we're looking at a 10-ton design. Curb and gutter trails, storm sewer, sanitary sewer, LED street lighting. All those are additional costs that are picked up by the city, and then the remaining costs are assessed on an ERU basis. So we have about $1.6 million in estimated roadway project costs. City costs are just over $900,000. Well, there's about $734,000 left for assessments, and there are 71 ERUs or lots in the project area, and that comes out to about $10,342 per lot. If you recall from our public informational meetings, using the same methodology, same quantities, everything, we were about 9.7. So that's how much it's gone per ERU, just based off of the costs that we're seeing right now when we bid projects. This is the assessment exhibit. Each circle on the drawing represents an ERU. The blue circles on the drawing are the ones that are being picked up by the city. And if you recall, there were several corner lots on this project that were unassessable. But just to try to help bring those costs down, the city did assume assessments on those corner lots. And then just kind of a summary of the overall project cost, again about $2.4 million. There's 60 ERUs that are actually accessible, but that are not part of the city's assessment. And that brings in about $620,000, or about 25% of the project. And then you can see all the estimated city costs at the bottom there, which total about $1.8 million. That's, again, I ran through it very quickly, but we've been through this several times, so I didn't want to take up too much time. But if you have questions, I can certainly answer those at this time.
Council questions or comments?
Yes, I don't want to belabor anything, but I'm just a little curious now of that 960 that's excess width. Can you break down, so that's 26 feet is what, anything beyond 26?
Yeah, so 26 feet of the bituminous pavement is what's being assessed to the property owners.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, just like any typical street in town. Kind of ignore the curb and gutter, just like a typical rural section would be used for an assessment purposes. Yeah.
Which, maybe you said it, I missed it, but you said the cost went up. Which part went up to?
Pretty much all the project costs went up, but definitely the roadway went up. You can see that in the assessments as well. Yeah.
Because of, it's still your estimate.
It's just where costs are. I mean, you saw it in the award for the Anderson Brothers project with Universal and those projects. Roadway costs were similar to what we estimated, but like storm, that was way up. But it did affect this one as well. Again, we're trying to come up with some reasonable costs, we don't wanna come in and roll when this is done next year either, so.
Yeah, you gotta use historical data. We're still not taking into account the potential for additional cost increases, right?
If I looked at this year's, I bumped them up a little bit, you know, trying to, it's still $22, we don't know what's gonna happen next year. But, yeah.
Audit project come in and they wanted to estimate 19% just for material changes,
Yeah.
material labor changes.
Okay. Nothing else? Thank you.
Yep.
Move forward to, drill management. Pavement.
Excuse me. Yeah, here just to present trail pavement management plan, similar to the street management plan and applied to just the trail system. We'll go over the overview, kind of the methodology, and then some of the costs of implementing the program. The overview, again, similar to the streets management plan, perpetuate and preserve existing trails in a fiscally responsible manner, correct deficiencies and slow the rate of deterioration, consider immediate and long-term needs, and then coordinate maintenance and rehab with street repairs and development, and then provide for better informed decision-making. So, similar to the streets, we instituted the PACER rating from 1 to 10, so trails were rated in 2020, and then updated with trails that were reconstructed or constructed in 2021. Currently, the trail system has just under 23 miles of bituminous trails, just under a mile of concrete trails, 6 miles of wood chips or native surface trails, 2 steel bridges, and 2 wood bridges. Current practice is to route and crack seal, and chip sealing was performed on some of the trails from 14 to 17, but was discontinued after seeing some of the issues with the streets. Also received some complaints from trail users with the roughness of the seal coat or chip seal surface. Of the bituminous and concrete section trails, here are the PACER ratings on that 1 to 10, 7 to 10. Basically, the vast majority of your system, just over about 17, 18 miles. There is down 4, 5s, and 6s, about 4 miles. These are a lot of the trails that were originally constructed in 1998. So, proposing for the maintenance strategies and rehab strategies of 9 and 10s to continue to route and seal and patch as is currently taking place. Same with 7 and 8s, but add in a microsurfacing component, 5s and 6s, overlays or milling overlays, 3s and 4s down to FDRs, and a 1 or a 2 rated trail would be a total reconstruction. A 12-year cycle was chosen for the preventive maintenance or the microsurfacing. Currently, we're seeing at 12 years out, the PACER ratings again in the 7 and 8s, with not not a lot of severe rutting, and cracks that have been sealed still being in relatively good shape. So goal then is with instituting the microsurfacing is to push out rehab to greater than 25 years, looking at the concrete pavements for replacement of a 30-year cycle, and then looking within parks, and not using that microsurfacing as a lot of it is short segments, kind of with concrete and then bit. There might be a few trails that are a little longer that could be microsurfaced, but generally the trails within the parks are difficult for that type of So here's with the microsurfacing, the street application, kind of a bigger machine and truck in front of it going down the street. There is a smaller machine, this Mini Mac for trails to be able to get into smaller spaces. When we talk that pavement life cycle, this green line here, year 0 with a newly paved surface, and then just over about a 25-year cycle, we're seeing that at the end of about 25 years, your trails are getting down to either being reconstructed, sometimes because of ADA reasons, but down with full depth reclamation, it looks like about 25 years with crack sealing and patching. Looking at year 12, as the proposed would be in red here, out to year 12 to a microsurface, get back up to a smoother surface, and then out to year 25, and then to be able to either do a mill and overlay instead of FDR at year 25 as the rehab at year 25. With that life cycle looked at, this would be an overall average cost, just on that green line, basically every 25 years to an FDR. We're looking at, if the whole system wide over 25 years, it would average out to just under $314,000 a year. In addition to that, the city currently budgets $53,000 for trail maintenance annually, with crack sealing, patching, wood chips. With the proposed maintenance strategy, looking again at that microsurfacing at year 12, and then the mill and overlay at 25, we're looking at system-wide at a cost of $203,000. At the basically $27,000 a year for microsurfacing, and $176,000 for those rehabs, and then continuing on with that $53,000 in maintenance that is currently being completed. So, example, Foley Road is supposed to be FDR this year, so 12 years out would be a microsurface. Year 25, the mill and overlay, and then we're looking at out at year 40 with the FDR. What is not in this, and we'll see how the microsurfacing goes. I know Mr. Cross brought it up at the Utility Commission, is can we microsurface over the microsurface? And so I guess this is maybe a little more conservative, but we'll see how those surfaces add out, and if we're able to mill that off and microsurface again, which I believe there's a decent chance of, that could reduce this cost as well. So just kind of summarize, again, city currently budgets $53,000 for these maintenance activities, and again, we'd be looking at implementing a microsurface at year 12 would be $27,000 annually, and then the rehabs, would be $176,000 annually.
I'd like to go back to the slide, it says page 18 here, it's probably not what you've got, the payment life cycle with the dollar cost. I want to make sure that,
Right here.
yeah. No, it's payment life. Yeah, there it is, I'm sorry. So, help me understand this now, the 313,000. That's an annual number if we did everything that you just talked about, or is it?
That's an annual number if you didn't do a maintenance program, but kinda, I don't wanna say just let your trails go, but didn't really do a repaving or milling or full depth reclamation until year 25 across your whole system. Right now,
So would that 313 replace all of our trails?
yes, over a 25-year period.
So not in one shot?
No,
So the 300,000 is a 23-year number, 25-year number?
yes.
Okay.
So like,
Scared.
with the Knollwood project you just saw, that I think there was a little over 500,000 in trail reconstruction. And I think that's how those trail improvements are kind of being brought together in street projects currently.
Actually, $7.8 million is what you're saying, right?
$7.8 million.
So what's your estimate if we start the trail management program today? Because that number is if we let things go for 25 years,
That's,
with
that's
only
the next
spending 59 or 53,000 a year, right?
Yeah. So it would be, back to this number. So you would start with an annual cost of microsurfacing, but there's also certain trails, I would say, that are kind of beyond this area. And so some of those trails, we still have, if they're already down here.
Yeah, but there's only 4 miles down there right now.
Right. And so you'd have those to reconstruct, and then we're looking at, you might be microsurfacing some at 12, and then some you would be hitting out for mill and overlays. Just depending on when, there's kind of groups of when trails are built, and there's maybe a way.
But that's starting to implement it today. If we start this year implementing it, that's what it's gonna cost for the next 40 years.
For next what?
For the next 40 years,
It's gonna cost 200 some thousand.
200,000 a year for 40 years, for a total of 8 million over 40 years versus 7.8 million over 25 years.
See, I think we're estimating too conservatively. Because right now, I mean, we watched MnDOT on 371 micro resurface twice over the top of itself to get rid of some of the ruts in the road. So that tells me we can micro resurface over micro resurface. So in the red line, why should we let the second red arc get down below 8? I mean, that was our pavement management plan when we were looking at the whole crack sealing deal, right, Trevor? We would do these little chip seals to bring the surface back up to a 10
Yeah.
every 10, 12 years, right? I don't remember what we were on the street.
That was 7.
It was 7.
Yeah.
Okay.
What we're worried about is that second microsurfacing, we have to mill it off.
Why?
Because of the height of every driveway, when we hit the concrete aprons and stuff, we're gonna have that, we're not gonna meet ADA standards because it's gonna be over a quarter of an inch trip hazard. Can't be over a quarter of an inch differential between the two heights.
Right, but over 12 years, it's gonna wear off.
Yeah. Well, we're not 100% sure on trails how it'll wear. I mean, it ain't like a street.
Right.
That's what we're worried about. What Brian is saying,
Okay, but
This is-
then you only have to mill where you get the concrete.
right,
At
might
the
have,
driveways, you don't have to mill the entire mile of trail.
right, might have to mill 20 feet in order to tie in the slopes and stuff, or 30 feet at each spot, or, I don't.
Right, so, you know, $27,000 to $40,000 a year in micro resurfacing is a whole lot more palatable than, you know, $200-some thousand a year to, you know, let the trails drop off to 4s, 5s.
But that's what Brian was saying in the one slide. As microsurfacing goes along and we learn more, this is a conservative effort. These numbers may get better. We may amend this plan and find out we can microsurface every 12 or 14 years throughout the 40 years. But he didn't want to promise something like we did on the chip sealing. We promised something that we couldn't deliver. And we're not 100% sure how the microsurfacing is gonna work on trails. There's not a lot of data out there on microsurfacing on trails, period. Microsurfacing is on city and state highways, not trails. So,
So how does it work there?
you know, the data's only about 15 years old and it looks good. I mean, microsurfacing has got better results than chip sealing. But,
You know, when I came here 30-some years ago, that was the first question I had for the city engineer, or not engineer at the time, but the
Yeah.
city public works director, was when can you micro seal my street?
Yeah.
Because it needs it. And I came from a city that micro sealed the streets and it worked. I mean, there's not 15 years data out there. There's a lot more data than that.
there is out of the state of Minnesota, yes. Not a lot in the state of Minnesota, and nothing really for trails. Trails are just being microsurfaced right now. I mean, the DNR's never done 1 mile of microsurfacing that I'm aware of to date. So there's not a lot of data out there of how it holds up. So that's why this is a conservative estimate. If microsurfacing would be more successful over the next 5 to 10 years, this plan will get better. That's what we're saying. We took
Why?
a conservative approach.
And I made the comment, you can make this plan so conservative that we can't accept it.
Well, right now,
It's there.
Right now, you're doing the 300,000 a year, so.
Well,
That's what's right now is every street that we're redoing, we're pretty much redoing the trail 100%.
yeah, but we're moving trails, we're changing sizes,
So it's
it's not just going in and saying, okay, this trail's a 4, we gotta fix it.
But it was on Isle Drive last year, and it was on College Road last year. Not all of them, yes, there's so many circuits, you got ADA, you got trails behind the curb. I mean, Knollwood you just had is ADA issues, so there's more than one issue out there why we do total reconstruction. But last year, College Road and Isle Drive were strictly 100% reconstruction and put right back in the same spot. We didn't change it because of ADA, we took it out because it was that old and it was sharp. With this plan, we won't do that anymore. We will microsurface after so many years and then only do a mill and overlay and get it to go out to 40 years before you're reconstructing. And what we're saying is we may be able to get that reconstruction point out further than 40 years if we can do 2 microsurfacings in there. So we've already saved the city $100,000 a year if we implement this plan. But we think maybe we can save more. But I'm not gonna say how microsurfacing is gonna react on trails. I'm just being more conservative because I've got burned so bad on the chip sealing. You ought to see the stripping out there this spring all over. It's just astronomical what it's doing on our streets. all the ones that we chip sealed, you know, from prior years back. But microsurfacing, like I say, is not tried and true much on trails anywhere yet. In fact, Aztec hasn't done it. Aztec in the state of Minnesota, which they do most of the microsurfacing in the state, they haven't done a trail in like 5 years. I think their machine has been broken down for 5 years. But they have done a few segments, so there is some data out there.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you, Brian. Did you guys hear this last night?
What is the savings, Brian? I mean, it goes from 303 to
203.
it's 100,000 a year savings. So over a 40-year period, it's over $4 million.
Okay.
Okay, so Oscar Christopherson Park, playset. On your regular agenda, you have a couple different action items on the consent agenda. One is for an installation quote, and another one is for the actual playset costs for replacement of the Oscar Christopherson Park playset. Just to give a little background to the council, we brought, well, of course, backing up further, the council has just recently started budgeting for park playset replacements through the budget process. In an evaluation of the various playsets in the city, it became evident that the Oscar Christopherson Park playset was in immediate need of replacement. And so that is what's being proposed for construction for this year. When you look at the condition of that particular playset, there's just a lot of wear and tear to the platforms, to the various bolts, and it's just in a condition that just needs repair or replacement. In looking at kind of the evaluation of a replacement of that playset, we raised this to the Parks and Trails Commission, I think 2 meetings ago, which probably went into late 2021 when we introduced it. The commission gave some feedback to staff as to, while understanding that we have a budget limitation on being able to replace the playset, there was an interest in looking at some non-traditional designs, and I think they gave examples of various playsets that kind of fit with what they were interested in rather than a typical playset, having to do with, you know, towers and climbing options and just different non-traditional playset type of improvements. And in working with St. Croix Recreation, they took those ideas and basically came up with a number of different proposals that the Parks Commission considered at their last meeting in February. And they ultimately did make a recommendation for what's on your agenda this evening. And here's a couple pictures of what that would look like. Oh, there's nothing to show here. Oh, what's going on?
Why won't they show?
Well, that's good.
Nothing to see here, folks.
Nothing to see here. Let's try this again. Sorry about that. Sorry for the delay. I'll keep talking while I do this. Well, looks like our computer's having technical problems. At any rate, there were a couple different playset platforms and proposals that got proposed by St. Croix to the Parks Commission. One had a number of additional platforms, and the other playset had a lot more equipment on the ground, so to speak. And they picked the secondary option with a lot more playsets on the ground level, and sorry, I'm just trying to open this up. This computer's struggling for some reason. Let's see if I can I had a nice 3D rendering that I was hoping to show the council, but we'll see if we can do it this way. So this isn't the 3D rendering that I was hoping to show, but this will give you an idea on the playset that was selected. Just to kind of walk the council through it, the playset is generally in the same space as the existing playset. When you think of that location and that park playset, these swing sets are in their existing conditions, so the proposal is to actually paint the poles of the existing swing set. And if you'll recall from the OK Park playset, there's a bridge that kind of goes to one of the platforms of the playset. That would all come out, and this entire new playset would get constructed. And the idea of the non-traditional came in with the tower element that you see here, which is basically from the lower platform, this kind of arched area on the side has the interior kind of climbing cables. So to get up to the upper level slide, there's this whole interior climbing element, which is really what the non-traditional ideas that the commissioners had that they were hoping to have. In addition, this playset has a lot of different playing options outside of the actual playset. Also, this option included a couple of different spinners. This particular spinner, in talking with the consultant, is probably one of the most popular spinners that they use. It's got opportunities for multiple people to sit on there, various different ages. And then this other spinner is kind of a individual spinner where more designed for 2 people. In addition to that, there's some logs and boulders and a playhouse that is more designed for the younger age. The idea with the design was to really cover all age groups for this park, which does receive all age groups. You know, it's not that there's just a very specific age that comes to OK Park. We really see all different ages, so that was the target, is to have a playset that covered all of those age groups. Another couple things I note with this is we have an existing rock climbing wall in about this area of the site, and the city's proposing to keep that. It's much newer than the rest of the playset, so we keep that. I think there's also a spring rider that we're hopeful to try to save as well with the project. So really, it is a playset replacement. It's a different playset than what's there, obviously, but it is a proposal that's within the total budget amount that's possible under the budget process. So I think the total amount that was budgeted and available is $175,000, and we are just falling just below that with the installation and the equipment. I would just also note, we've spent a lot of time working with the consultant to look at a lot of the details when it comes to chips, ADA accessibility, swings, just brackets, everything to try to make sure that we are good with our numbers, to make sure we are falling underneath that park budgeted line. So I guess with that, I'd see if there's any questions by the council. We moved fast because if we don't, with ordering delays, we're just, we don't want to get into a situation where the OK Park playset has to be roped off and where kids can't use it if it happens to deteriorate further quickly. So we're trying to make sure we get this in for a 2022 year project.
And might want to add, Josh, the goal is sometime in the month of June. Right now, if they approve it tonight.
I just, a couple of times in the minutes, there was interest in saving the tree. And the question was asked, could this be moved to save that tree? And I never saw an answer. I'm thinking that, is that
Yeah, there was no answer given that night.
Well, that's why.
You know, I think Trevor probably need to talk to him about that one, because I know he doesn't feel the tree can be saved. So.
Okay. Always one of those.
Yeah, I wish we had a better layout to show, but that tree sits about right in here. What we want to do is we want to run that sidewalk, the ADA accessible sidewalk, all the way to the fence line to the east. And we want to turn everything from the fence line to the south, or from the sidewalk to the south fence line, all into chips. Right now, there's a little stretch of grass where these spinners are going to go. We we wanna get rid of all that grass area and go all strictly wood chips, because we need to get rid of the sprinkler system out of there. There's a little bit of, there's one line of irrigation system in there. So we're planning on taking all that out, and that tree has been causing us problems with the sap and the needles in the wood chips. The tree needs to come out. The tree really needs to go away, because then on top we won't have the irrigation system in there to keep it alive. We don't plan on keeping a drip line, you know, and then by the time we dig all the way around it to get the wood chips 1 foot deep, you've pretty much cut into the roots. Now, it is a pine tree, so the tap root, the main tap root, you know, is straight down, but it does have, you know, some fingerlings even on a pine tree, but we'll cut those all off on 3 sides of it. So we don't think the tree will live anyway, but it's also causing us major problems with the maintenance right now between the sap and the needles.
Okay. Was that explained? I mean, simple yes or no, and if not, you just do an email to them, to the commission, so they know.
No, it was not explained.
There could be a
Yeah.
or,
Well, I told Josh that I would, call Josh Pennington was the one.
Yeah.
I was gonna call Josh directly.
that's good. That's good. Any other questions or comments about that? Just before I move to the last one, Brad, the acceptance of the trail pavement management plan is on the consent agenda. Are we comfortable enough to move forward on that, or what are you hearing from us?
It's a determination from the 3 of you, if you wanna hold it off and have further discussion. Comfortable, obviously, the pavement management plan is a budgetary item to help us cast out or forecast our future financial needs. Make sure that it's plugged in. That being said, if there's not enough comfort level here tonight, you can pull it from consent agenda and take action on it individually after further conversation, or you can table it to a future meeting.
It's just because you approve it tonight doesn't mean that it has to be followed to a T. What we're planning on doing is now we'll bring the numbers to the budget in June and July, and then it's up to the city council if you're gonna budget and follow it or
Okay.
not. I mean, it's.
Gotcha. Well, I think the sticker shock is those numbers, and they probably aren't gonna change, so whether we table or not.
What isn't presented is what we've been spending on an annual basis. I mean, we've already been spending $200,000-300,000 a year right now replacing trails on, that analysis, you know, wasn't in here. What we've been spending the last 4 or 5 years, you know, Isle and College last year was several hundred thousand, you know, 1 or 2, probably around $200,000 of trail replacement that was in that project. We're already doing trail replacement on every road segment.
Yeah.
It's just that it hasn't been called out directly in a plan like this, but we've already started. We're already spending $200,000-300,000 a year. Fully Road, I forget what the trail replacement is on Fully Road, you know, in 2022 this year. That's over $250,000. And then Knollwood Drive, the trail costs are what in 2023 estimated in that? You remember from your presentation? I mean, I think that was over $250,000. So we're already planning it and doing it.
Sorry I asked.
But that analysis is not in that.
I got you.
But the problem is that we haven't had a maintenance program other than crack sealing. So we're replacing probably more than we need to.
Should have.
And if we've taken that $500,000 and spread it out over the last 10 years, well, actually at $27,000 a year.
27,000 a year is what we could
Another
start.
20 years practically.
That is what we're asking for right now, is to start the microservicing plan
Okay.
immediately.
Thank you for that clarification there. Okay, Jeremy, you're next. Or no?
Can I got the 3D renderings.
And that actually has the swings and it doesn't have the climbing wall, but right where that kid is in blue off to the right, that's about where that tree is.
Okay.
Yeah, so the pavilion would be just off the swings to the left there. So this is kind of looking towards the ball field.
Northwest.
Yeah, northwest.
Northwest towards the ball field.
And then this is the other rendering of what it looks like. Gives you a little bit better idea of that tower element. So.
Is that the
They wanted a taller tower height, but you can't really achieve that without the platforms. So, but the benefit of this one, even though it's a little bit smaller tower, is you save some costs with all the platforms to get all of this extra stuff around the outside.
And then when you go to the platforms, then you gotta have the ADA ramp up to the platforms. So, and that's where the cost really goes up, is that ADA ramp.
Okay, thank you. Are you running this one?
So kind of opposite of the last discussion, but I'm gonna talk about the other side of the equation, the revenue side, so maybe a little bit different conversation than spending money. Although it does lead to spending.
Find us a money tree.
No. Okay, so just a little bit of update, kind of where we're at with the ARPA, the American Recovery Plan funding discussion, and some of the recent outcomes that we've noticed now with the final ruling. So the rule, or the law, I should say, was signed in March of 2021, and that was to provide an additional $360 billion of funding across the country to various entities, including state governments, as well as direct recipients. And that included larger counties, as well as larger cities throughout the country. For Minnesota specifically, it was the 87 counties, as well as 21 Minnesota cities. Everyone else then fell under the indirect recipients, or what's referred to as a non-entitlement unit, or NEU. Those entities, including the city of Baxter, received their funding through the state. All this is based on a formula, a per capita formula, for the entities across the country. So for the city of Baxter, we are to receive about $914,000, and that's in 2 tranches. The first half of that was received in 2021. The second half is scheduled to be received mid-2022, later this summer. The spending timeline for these eligible activities is a lot more flexible than what we saw with the CARES fund or the CRF funds. It's for project costs that were incurred starting in March of 2021, so it goes back retroactively to March of last year. And that includes any eligible activities that would be through the end of 2024 that are obligated, but can be spent with final payment, I guess, through 2026. So a lot more flexibility, designed really to provide governments the opportunity to look at kind of the long-term effects of COVID, including revenue losses and things, where the CARES fund looked specifically at the immediate impact and how were we going to react to immediate impact of COVID. So if you recall with that timeline, we really only had less than 6 months to spend the money by the time we had to spend it or obligate it or return it to the county initially before it went back to the state by the end of 2020. So a lot more process to be a little bit more diligent in how we're looking at the funds over the next number of years. So there's really 4 eligible categories that the uses of the grant funds can be utilized for. The first one being that COVID response and adaptation, so similarly mirroring what was occurring with the CRF funds to respond to the public health pandemic and address the negative economic impacts of that, which is what we did with the CRF money, providing funding to the county to provide funds to a local unit or to businesses that were impacted by it, as well as some of the PPE and other HVAC and other improvements that we did in city facilities. And then the second one is premium pay is eligibility for public sector first responders. The third and fourth options are probably the ones that we're tending to focus on the most. The third one being the public sector revenue loss replacement, and the fourth and final one being infrastructure investment through water, sewer, and broadband. What's interesting now that has occurred through the public sector loss revenue is the Treasury recently released its final ruling that becomes effective on April 1st of 2022. In the interim, there was an interim rule in place that still had some rules that still really needed to provide additional guidance for the program that Treasury is now doing through that final rule. In addition to that, there was a lot more flexibility that was granted in that final rule, including some expanded eligible use of water and sewer infrastructure uses that were previously identified in the interim rule, tying really back to some of the federal programs for water and sewer purposes, but has expanded the definition of some of those eligible uses. And then what's even more important, I think that impacts us even greater, is the implementation of default minimum revenue loss allowance, and that's $10 million. So where previously we probably didn't qualify under the revenue loss category because we didn't see a significant loss in revenue like some cities may have done because they had rec programs, rec centers, significant reductions in lodging and hotel taxes and other things. That wasn't really kind of the case for the city of Baxter. The Treasury kind of, I think, realized that they didn't really want to probably audit all these thousands of entities across the country, so they kind of similar to what I would refer to as like when you file your income taxes, if you take the standard deduction, you're kind of looking at a minimum threshold of what they want to really kind of get into the weeds on. So they're allowed kind of a $10 million revenue loss allowance that doesn't require entities to have any actual revenue loss up to that $10 million. However, they can still utilize funds for traditionally provided government services unless they've spelled out those activities that aren't allowed. And some of those activities that aren't specifically allowed, they don't want you to be using it to pay for debt service. They don't want to be using it for shoring up your pension funds if you have those. Obviously, we operate through the Minnesota PARA system, so that's not something we would directly fund. You can't use it to reduce taxes that are in place, as well as save it for a rainy day. One of the other, I'm trying to remember what the other category was. There was another one too that they specifically had identified in there too. So just, there's some limited areas that they don't want you to be using for. Oh, the other one is to use it for anything that's contrary to the, basically what the CDC guidance was on COVID. So to be advertising against that, they kind of put that rule in as well. So a lot more flexibility on the use of that $10 million standard allowance that can be used really over that period from 2021 through 2024 with final payments for the projects that are outstanding through the end of 2026. So with that process does come some additional reporting requirements specifically tailored to the ARPA program as well as just any federal grants in general. So for the special reporting requirements through the ARPA process, there is a Treasury portal, and one for the NEU, which would be what the city of Baxter falls under. There is some reporting that begins this April for any costs that have been incurred to date, or grant funds, I should say, that have been expended to date. As with any other federal grant, it is subject potentially to a single audit. So for the threshold for that is $750,000 annually. So if we incur $750,000 of federal expenditures related to federal grants, we are subject to a single audit. So with that does come some uniform guidance requirements that we need to follow, as well as some additional compliance requirements that the auditors would test for, as well as other categories, one of them being procurement. So we have to go through some special rules on how we're spending the money, how we're bidding the process, and how the documentation for that. So there's some additional costs associated with that, not only on the monitoring side through the audit process, but also potentially through any contracts if we decide to go a contract route where we utilize some of the funds for that purpose. So with those planned expenditures, one of the ways to minimize the additional costs and audit requirements, well, I will mention first and foremost that a regular audit still ensures those activities are in compliance with the grant. So avoiding a single audited in cost isn't necessarily the reason to do that, but there's certainly a lot of headaches associated with a single audit that if we don't have to go through that, why go down that path when we certainly could potentially program our way around that, given the flexibility we have over the next 5 or so years. So we could schedule some of those eligible expenditures over that time period to be in conjunction with other federal grants. So for example, we know in 2022, we have a little over $600,000 of federal grants identified with the Inglewood and 210 Railroad Crossing project. So if looking at kind of where we're at today, some of the expenditures that we could date back to 2021, we hardly have any federal grants in 2021. So some of those portions, if the council chooses to do, so we could allocate some of those to eligible project costs into 2021 before we close out our 2021 financial statements, as well as look over the few years after that, 23 to 24. One of the interesting categories that has come up that a number of consultants have kind of pointed to with regard to the flexibility requirement and the documentation that we would have to do in conjunction with that is under the revenue loss category, expenditures that are related to employee salaries are eligible expenditures. So we can simply identify those expenditures that we put in place with salaries that are already budgeted, provide the required documentation, whether it's timesheets and payroll records, to document that cost. Then we are able to kind of know it's a known cost to us. We can kind of plan around those 4 or 5 years to make sure that we're within that threshold of the single audit. But not only that, we would be able to then allocate those resources towards other needs that the city has that follow along the lines of those governmental services. So kind of continuing on that theme, some of the potential projects that certainly have been identified, that's something that we'll be looking to the council to provide some guidance on, I guess, in the coming month or two as we start to move through that process, especially if we are looking to potentially allocate some proceeds back to 2021, would be the water treatment plant project. So initially looking at the fact that we haven't put a lot of funding towards anything at this point, we don't have federal grants associated with it. We allocated, for example, up to $700,000 towards that $1.3 million of water-related costs that we have incurred to date. That includes not only the water treatment plant filters, but also the well rehabs that we've done, and some improvements to the interconnect building and the SCADA system. That could certainly help with some of those future rate increases that may be associated with paying for those improvements. There is, just to note, another $1.2 million based on that current budget of water treatment plant filters remaining to be incurred, I guess, at this point. And then again, kind of maybe taking a little bit of a break in 2022. We've got $600,000 attached to the Foley project, and we're kind of maybe getting close to that 750 threshold. One of the other projects that I kind of looked at specifically was in 2023. We have 2 larger pieces of street replacements, scheduled equipment replacements, the dump truck plow and the grader replacements, which are in excess of $500,000 allocating. For example, the remaining $200,000 towards that project would help fund that project. Currently, those expenditures are about 40% funded, so being able to have kind of an avenue to pay for some of those may help pay for some of their costs on other projects as we move forward as well too. But those are just 2 examples, I guess, of potential uses that would provide some citywide benefit that council may wish to consider that would help alleviate some future tax increases that could occur or water rate increases that could occur. So I guess the good news is with the final ruling, there is a lot more flexibility, I guess, for us. We have a lot more time to be a little more deliberate about it, but we certainly can look at, some of the costs we've incurred specifically related to the water treatment plant in 2021 if we want to allocate some of those costs back through those mechanisms, and that includes not only the category where the water plant stuff would be specifically eligible, but also via the payroll part of it too, is from a documentation standpoint that would provide some flexibility to the city as well. One of the, I think, benefits of looking at some of those 2021 costs too is we don't know what the future is going to hold for federal grants. So if there are federal grants available to us, knowing that some of the infrastructure funding that's coming through the pipe, even the stuff that's already passed, there could be the potential for some other significant federal grants that could be on our radar potentially in the future that we can kind of plan around that a little bit as well. So I can hopefully answer any questions you have. We are still kind of working through some of the questions with our auditors, I guess, on how some of the mechanics of some of that stuff would work, and just making sure we have it kind of buttoned up too before we would make any final recommendations on anything. But it appears that this is some of the avenues that some cities have gone down that path. I can reference one city to the south of us specifically allocated a significant amount of their project back to a lift station project for its ongoing from 2021 going forward. That's kind of how they looked at it too.
Council, So there's no rush, we have more time than we've ever had before, so my question is, again, there's no rush for you, but who's gonna put together the recommendations of how we spend it, you guys, the finance, the administration, or?
Well, we'd be looking for the council, I guess, I'm not
Yeah.
sure final recommendation would be. I think from my perspective, the only real deadline probably is, we're gonna use some of it in 2021s as we're finishing out the financial statements for the audit in early May, that we probably want to know in April, so that we can record those transactions, I guess. A certain portion of that wants to be, if you want to sort of allocate a certain portion back to 2021. I think that's where we have the luxury of the hindsight, looking at how we did have federal grants at some 50 in 2021, and we had expenditures that would be eligible, that we could apply those back to that if that's what you chose to do.
Are you looking for some kind of recommendations?
Not necessarily tonight, unless you just want to have discussion, I guess, on that, give us some feel, but I think we would be looking to come back at a future meeting, probably either the first one in April, or maybe the second one in April, if there's something you want to do for 2021 specifically at least.
Okay,
I have some comments, Mr. Mayor.
we can come back,
Okay.
during the administrator's, time maybe or something like that.
Council Ford?
We sure can. So, but at this time, let's go